How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and welcome to one of your replays. And of course, this is Perseus playing in the WZ-121GFT, and this is a very interesting tank, and certainly one of the better ones that I've really enjoyed watching. And of course, thank you very much for sending it in, Perseus. This is one of, I believe, the second replay that we've showcased on the channel. So if you guys also want to send in your own replays, then the best way of doing it is uploading a replay onto YouTube, private it, and then just send me a link in the email in my description below, so you guys can also be featured on the channel. I'm not saying I'm going to upload every single replay that I might get, but if I find one that I think is really useful, or a tank that I haven't yet uploaded myself, then yeah, thank you for very much for sending it in. And of course, if you do want to send it in yourself, you can. Now, this tank is the Chinese tier 8 premium tank destroyer, I believe. So there is another version, I believe it's called the Yahtzee, and this is the Yahtzee was one of the vehicles I actually had the best game that I've ever had in, at least from a standpoint of like enjoyment, actual damage, and also just farming opponents. So you can see here the reload of this tank, and what the premise of this tank destroyer is that it's super fast firing for the alpha damage that this gets. I believe it's 440 alpha damage per shell. Off the top of my head, it may even be 490. But either way, you're reloading in like 8.8 seconds, which when you're dealing that at tier 8 is really nice, because a lot of the tanks that you're coming up against don't have anywhere near that alpha damage. A lot of the medium tanks also can't really compete with that either. But you've kind of got this good balance between being able to deal damage, spot, have good camo, and it is just a very good all-round tank destroyer, and hence why I wanted to feature this replay, as well as the fact that it was a brilliant game by Perseus himself. So slightly different kind of HUD, I guess, to the usual one. I believe I've got the red and green HUD. This is of course the standard version HUD that they've now introduced when update 6.0 went live, probably 2 years ago now, thinking about it. And of course we've been able to showcase how this tank is going to play out. Now, it's very easy to assume that this tank is like, I don't know, overpowered. Now, the tank is not overpowered just because it's had quite a few amazing replays. Now, that's mainly down to the fact that it's a very high skill cap tank, and that means anyone that is really good at the game can take advantage of this tank, and the player is not really limited by the tank itself. I always talk about this, having a flexible tank, or a tank that allows you to kind of perform better if you are a higher skill cap player. Then you're going to be able to essentially deal more damage and be able to do things that you may not be able to do in another tank. And that's why I think tanks like this, the Yahtzee, things like a lot of the light tanks, things like the Batchat 12T even at tier 8, which is a really weird one, but one I found that you can carry quite well in, and it comes down to the driver rather than the tank itself. And so yeah, tanks like this, really good. And of course, having picked up 3,100 damage in a game that is fairly even at this point, to be honest, is not bad. And you know, that would be a very good game for the average player on World of Tanks to have in a tier 8 tank destroyer. But that is nowhere near where this gameplay ends up, and so we're going to progress with this replay and see how much damage can be racked up in this little monstrosity that is the WZ-121GFT. So the sort of thing that you probably want to be doing in these Chinese tank destroyers is not necessarily going in too much, because at the end of the day they are limited by the gun depression, they are limited by the armor capability. They do have some armor, so imagine like a Soviet kind of medium tank armor. That's sort of what these tank destroyers have. Most of the time people will pen you straight through the superstructure, so it doesn't really matter whether you're angling and doing anything of that, they'll still be able to pen you. But it doesn't really matter, because the key thing is that you're punishing them back for 440 alpha damage. So it's really, really easy for you to kind of gather huge amounts of damage if people are just sat in front of you. And you can see here a Talon appearing out of nowhere, and a nice round goes into him. Now there's an FE4202P, which is a premium vehicle that was given out when when the FE4202 that is actually in game right now got removed from World of Tanks. It did actually get removed for a period of time, and when they released the Centurion Action X. And in doing so, they basically gave everyone who had the FE4202 the FE4202 Premium, which is essentially a tier 8 version. It's not very good, but I digress. This tank is certainly one that you can carry in towards the later half of the game, provided that you've saved up enough of your hit points or prevented any kind of loss of hit points from just kind of bad misplays or anything like that, because of the fact that you have the high alpha damage, because you can essentially, by this point in the game, probably two-shot everyone that you meet because they've at least taken one hit or maybe two or whatever, and often you can actually one-hit people because they are just that low, where you might take a 200 damage hit, but you're going to deal the rest of their hit points out of the game. Now, that can't be said against the FE4202P, who's making an aggressive play, but it's quite a nice little easy shot into the side of the turret there, making a decent chunk of hit points disappear off of him. Now, at this point, the Patriot's looking at someone else. It's time to farm his side, and with the 423 damage hit there, really, really nice. And you must be thinking in this sort of scenario where you've done 4,200 damage that you're just chasing damage at this point, and making sure that you're securing whatever damage you can, and hence why he fully aimed that into the side of the Patriot, making sure that there were no mistakes or anything like that that could potentially ruin his day. But now with the FE4202P kind of bearing down on the light tank, and him not realising that this tank is bearing down from his backside, then yeah, he's been successfully taken out. Having received no hits so far, this is a very good position for this tank because of the fact that you can now go in after whatever is remaining, or potentially play however you like. You're not limited by having to make certain decisions due to your hit point pool. So, obviously, he now knows that it's the tank destroyer in the middle of the map, since the two medium tanks have just been spotted by his friend in artillery, playing the equalizer, unfortunately. But yeah, with 4,700 damage done and the enemy team looking like they're actually pretty healthy, it's got to be down to him and the atomic to secure the victory against the opponent. So, coming into this little bush area and the spawn area, this is often where a lot of TDs will camp the entire game. That is a bad misplay if you decide to camp here the entire game, because A, it's only worth it in a scenario like this where you may only end up with like a couple thousand damage anyway, or B, the enemy team have just ruffle stomped your team because you've been sat in the back doing nothing all game, and then you end up getting one hit of damage and then they all stomp you, because 15 tanks on one doesn't typically last very long. But either way, this gameplay is not that. Our player here, Perseus, has decided he's going to take the fight to the opponents, and in doing so picked up early damage and then returned to the base to defend it against the Kappas, or the potential Kappas. And now it's time to come up against those three enemy tanks that have pushed in, and they are the Charioteer. We've got a Centurion 1, I believe, off the top of my head from what I can see and remember, and of course there's one other medium that I don't think we've met so far. Now, there is a broken gun, and it would have been maybe sensible to have repaired it at some point, but you never know as to what's going to come. So whether or not in the heat of the moment he's forgotten to actually repair the gun, I don't know, but maybe or maybe not. But there is a cruncher out in the open who's been kind of caught out, and so in a nice little fashion, looking towards this cruncher, just trying to crunch his way through. Sorry, that was just, it had to be done. But yeah, the cruncher is certainly not a tank to just leave farming aside, since it has okay damage per minute, and that's probably about the only thing good about it. I think the rest of it is fairly mediocre, but now knowing that you can fully hit every single round on the atomic and actually repairing that gun for the last time in the game, 6,000 damage picked up so far. The cruncher then fires a round but doesn't get spotted, so not ideal, but you can kind of get over it at some point. Now, There's no food in this vehicle, so that is a surprising to see, but you just saw that an enemy tank got set on fire, I think, because someone drove over it. So I don't know if the Cruncher has returned to the base, but he may well have done. But at this point, it's just a case of hunting down the Cruncher, and I guess we can skip forward since there's not a whole deal of stuff that actually happens, and you find that our player here ends up in the cap circle, and you can finally see the game ends just before he could cap the base with 3 seconds left. Victory screen, of course, and 6,002 damage done, picking up 2,110 base experience with 6 kills. A fantastic replay by Perseus RL, and of course, thank you very much for sending it to me. It was a brilliant replay to watch. I've really enjoyed it, and of course, I love this vehicle entirely as well. Thank you very much. I hope you did enjoy, and don't forget to check out some other videos coming soon. Goodbye.